Hey, when are you gonna rig up that pulley system so I can do that bit from that's gonna be fun. I'm really looking for that. 2, 3, 4. Do do boop 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 boo. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. It's Wednesday. I'm in something. Hey everybody. Uh month 11 of quarantine and my hair has decided to make me look like John Oates. So I guess the mustache is also doing its part. So Daryl Hall trapped in a John Oates body. Picks of the hey ha 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 ha. Woo! All right. Excuse me. Today I went to the funny book store. I had a very close call this week. One of my coworkers at the small ophthalmologist's office, wherein I do the very important work of filing charts. Uh, apparently, she got the cove. So that's why I don't have to wear a shirt and tie today. I went and got tested yesterday. I'm fine. Or it came back negative yesterday. And I'm not, whatever. And, but that does mean I don't have to go into the office for the rest of this week. I'm out that very tiny amount of money, but I guess it's, worth it. But, yeah. Usually, and that's actually because usually Wednesdays are one of my worst days because I have both jobs, so that's like a 10-hour work day right there. And then I got this thing. It means I have to go to the comic shop, and I usually go grocery shopping since it's right next to the comic shop. This is all fascinating, I know. And then my weekly music podcast, The Worm Turns with Jimmy Calloway, available now wherever you get podcasts, unless you get podcasts from Spotify, which I'm also closing down at the end of March. So if you've been waiting for an excuse to download a podcast and then never get around to listening to it, now's your chance. But I usually end up having to do like I did manage to get some work done on it the last couple days, but what I'm saying is if one of my coworkers had not gotten COVID-19, my day would be a lot more stressful today. And I needed to save that being stressed out for screaming at my kid for fucking up with his homework. I'm not supposed to be swearing. I don't need to say any of that either. Oh, well, I guess it's too late. So anyway, I went to the comic shop, is the point. And I picked up some funny books. First up, I got Redemption #1 from the AWA publisher. AWA, of course, stands for All Women All the Time. In this instance, it's pretty accurate. So you got yourself a futuristic Western dystopia, a weird Western, as I like to call them, and drawn by Mike Deodato Jr. and written by Ms. Krista Faust. And one of my favorites, novelists. She wrote Bad Mother series, which I recently finished as well. And a hell of a novelist. I recommend picking up any of her books. I don't know if you're into the television show Supernatural at all, but she's written some of the novelizations for that show. I haven't read those because I don't watch the show, but if Krista wrote them, you're in good hands. This is a no-brainer. It's Krista Faust. It's Mike Deodato. It's a weird Western, which is a subgenre I can never, ever get enough of. I think most people think of weird Westerns as being Westerns that take place in the Old West, and then there's like science fiction elements or usually supernatural. I think Weird Western Tales is a comic book printed by the DC Comics publisher in the 1970s. And it's one of my favorite titles. And just that brand, and like Jonah Hex came out, right? I think Jonah Hex had his first appearance in Weird Western Tales. It might have been All-Star Western, actually. But Jonah Hex definitely had a lot of weird adventures, especially with the Vertigo books they did in the 90s, which aren't canon, I guess. Who cares? Oh, I meant to change my shirt. I have a stain. I guess I can just do that. So anyway, yeah, it's always been one of my favorites. This one looks like it's like in the future, so it's not exactly. But I don't know that there's any. I don't know that I might be the only person who ever even really thinks of this as a subgenre. I mean, I don't know what I mean, to be honest with you. How's this? Much better. Okay. Also, I bought Fear Case #1 from the Dark Horse publisher. This is written by Matt Kint and drawn by Tyler and Hillary Jenkins, who I don't know. I don't know anything about this book except that Matt Kint wrote it, and that's all I need to know. I didn't realize, or I did realize this, but I forgot to mention it, I guess. Matt Kent is starting his own publisher. At least I think it's his. You know what? I got the thing. So this was in the bag when I got to the shop today. Your store has been selected as a distinguished participant in the launch of Bad Idea. There are only 154 Bad Idea destination stores worldwide. This is one of them, and you've been chosen as one of their most elite customers. Now we are extending you an exclusive early invitation to become one of the first Bad Idea subscribers anywhere in the world. New publishers come and go, but bragging rights are forever. Please flip invitation RSVP. Formal attire discouraged. So again, I'm in good shape. So this is basically just a cutesy way of pushing these 5. You know what? I have some more literature. I guess I'll show that to you after we talk about the Lord. But yeah, there's 5 titles on here, 2 of which are written by Matt Kent. And then the others are written by Robert Venditti, Marguerite Bennett, and Zeb Wells. 3 writers with whom I'm familiar, but I don't generally read. I just read something by Marguerite Bennett that I liked. Now I can't remember what it was, but so I think it's Matt Kent though. I don't know why. Maybe that's just the name, or maybe it's because he's writing 2 books where everybody else is writing 1. I think it's his though. And this is something I meant to get into it more with Lauren down at the shop, because this is definitely a trend that I would have noticed were I still working in a comic shop. But a lot of these small publishers are really coming out swinging, and swinging pretty big, swinging for those fences. Is that the right sports metaphor? Look that up. I think it's basketball. But it seems to be going. I don't know, man. Like when I quit working for that comic shop in 2018 in fall, and I don't think any of these indie publishers were. AWA wasn't around. I'm thinking largely it's like AWA. Aftershock is older than that, but they've been, only putting out good stuff. You got TKO. This is all these publishers. I know I've mentioned it over the course of the last year, but yeah, it's really something. So, but if they're going to come out with big talent, this was how the small press boom of the 80s started. Was in the late 70s. They started like publishers like Pacific Comics out of San Diego's own Pacific Comics, and Dark Horse. Although Dark Horse wasn't until 86. Well, Dark Horse probably came out of this then, yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. In the late 70s, publishers like Pacific Comics, I'm hard pressed to think of another one, but Pacific was definitely out in front. They started publishing books by people like Neil Adams and Jack Kirby because they were legends in the industry, and they had come back around from, they were on fire in the 60s. Into the 70s, it started to wane, but then in the 80s, it started to pick back up again. And so publishers were like, hey, Jack Kirby, would you like to do a book? Hey, Neil Adams, would you like to do a book? And they were like, yes, but. And they said, no, no buts. You will publish it. We'll take a piece, and you own and you can do reprint rights or whatever else. And that's been working ever since. So you had Pacific doing that in the 70s. You had Image doing that in the 90s. And then you have these companies doing it now. There was another one I was trying to think of. I think it's great. I mean, obviously, I hope. It's just weird that it comes out. It's kind of coming at this time. Because when this pandemic started, I was honestly more worried about the comic book industry than I was my own health. I still am more worried about that. Anyway, it's remarkable. Hence why I remarked on it. And then finally, I got Runaways number 33. I only brought this up because I noticed when I was doing my previews, or even before, like over the last week, I was like, I haven't seen an issue of the Runaways in a while. Because this was a book that I had actually dropped. And then I was enjoying it on the Marvel app so much, I was like, I'm going to go back to buying this monthly. It's really good. And I mean, it always has been. I think Runaways is definitely one of the most consistent titles Marvel has ever had in its 71-year history. 72? 72. Yeah. And I think it's largely because it was started in the late 90s, early 2000s by Brian K. Vaughan, who is a very talented writer and is. And then it was taken over by, I think, Terry Moore. Vaughan wrote it for a long time. Terry Moore wrote it for a while. I want to say either Warren Ellis or Joss Whedon. That's who it was. It was not Ellis. Joss Whedon wrote it for a while, and now Rainbow Rowell is writing it. Like, you would be hard pressed to handpick 5 better writers in comic books. So it is again remarkable. You don't generally, or at least not in the old days. I guess that's something else just from because I read a lot of the old shit these days too, and so maybe it's just it's standing out to me more. But yeah, this has been really good. This character has been a real fun breakout character. This character's name is Jib, I believe it's pronounced. So, I mean, long story short, the Runaways are all superpowered children who found out that their parents were supervillains themselves. And so they didn't know that they were superpowered until they found out that their parents were all supervillains. So then they banded together to defeat their parents from destroying the world. How they were going to do it was by sacrificing the world to this race of gods. I'm not sure what dimension. I think they're from a different dimension or something like that. In fact, I think that was the Runaways' parents were going to sacrifice their own children to these gods, the Gibberim, in order to take over the world. And so the Runaways were not only defeating them because it was the right thing to do, it was for their own survival. And so that was the very first story. But the premise of this group of children trying to work together, I mean, they're a little bit older now in Marvel time even. Like, most of them are out of school now. I think Molly's the only one who's still in school, which is hard to do when you're a runaway. But this fella here is a child of the Gibberim. He's not a full-grown one. And he when the Gibberim came back around earlier in this series, and the Runaways had to fight them again. And part of their victory was that they were kind of stuck with this kid. But then it's like he's a bit of a runaway himself now. So I'm like, yeah, this is really good. Marvel has been this title has been really good over the years about not only kind of keeping the original team consistent with some, like Gert was dead for a long time. But then they'll bring in characters like Victor La Mancha, right? This is a Don Quixote reference, who is Vision's like grandson, even though he's a robot. Another cast-off, though. Another runaway. It's really fun, so I'm just happy to. And then Rainbow Rowell, who I don't know that I've read a lot of her other stuff, but I'm just consistently blown away by how really good it is. The dialogue is very crackly, and it's really, really good stuff. I can't recommend it enough. I also can't recommend your voice changing. That was Picks Out of the Week. So I was thinking after this. Picks Out last week! All right. I only finished one of these today, in fact, because I've been a busy boy. I read Star Wars Bounty Hunters number 9. This is super good. One thing I've really noticed I think it's just this title. No, Star Wars does it too. They've been doing this where they put the title and subtitle at the top. I really like how it looks. I wish they would do more shit like that. The Terminus Gauntlet. That's the arc. And then this issue is entitled Squadron of One. That's one of my, oh God, I love that. That was a Punisher trade paperback, was called Army of One, which I've always, that was when that was the slogan of the United States Armed Forces. And yeah, this is really good. So like I was saying last week, Baylor Valence here is a bounty hunter. And I didn't realize it was just last issue that they really started to, because I know I was talking last week about how Valence was he was an Imperial. He was not a stormtrooper, but he was a pilot. He was a TIE fighter pilot. And the Empire is very structured very similarly. You'll find this hard to believe. Like the military. So pilots tend to be, officers. And Valence is very much an Imperial officer. But in flashback, we see back and forth from this storyline. So in the current storyline, Valence has, in the last arc, he saved the life of a young girl. I don't remember all the details. And he saved her life by bringing her to the rebellion so that they could, protect her. And so in order for them to do this, though, since he's a bounty hunter and not to be trusted, and also a former Imperial on top of that, even though he hates the Empire now, so he has to go rescue this squad of rebels who are surrounded by Imperials out in space somewhere. And he does it all by his lonesome, and it's super badass. Can't recommend it enough. And then we find out in flashback, as counterpoint to all this, how, you know, his father was also an officer for the Empire and was very much, very Arlie Ermy to this kid. It worked. He was literally had the Empire beaten into him. He joined up when he was old enough. And then he's on a mission and he was shot down. His whole squadron was shot down, in fact. And the Empire just bailed. And so he found out, like many soldiers in the Empire would imagine, how little the Empire actually cares about them as people. It's just a faceless power vacuum. You know, it's just sucking up as much power as it can. And then he's, at the end of this issue, he's rescued, in that flashback, he's rescued by his own squadron, including a pilot by the name of Han Solo. So it's all comes together. It's so much fun. There's also a novel that I bought for the Kindle. My you know, for the Kindle. Somebody come over to help me program my VCR later. I think it's called Alphabet Squadron, and I'm really chomping at the bit to read it, but I got a lot of other things to do. Get off my back. I'm kidding. And then also, just today I read this, the other History of the DC Universe #2. Great stuff still. I think I like this even more than the first issue. The first issue was the story of Black Lightning, as told by Black Lightning. This is a story. This is Mal Duncan, and this is Karen Duncan Beecher, his wife, who was known as Bumblebee, and this was Guardian. So Guardian was a Metropolis superhero, more for the streets. You know, Superman was like the big picture guy from Metropolis, but, you know, he wasn't always catching muggers and shit like that. So you had Guardian doing that. And can't remember his name, but that was a Jack Kirby creation. And then when that book went by the boards, Mal Duncan was kind of the Teen Titans mascot. He keeps referring to himself in this. And this was all news to me. I was not familiar with these characters at all. I knew Guardian because of Kirby, but I had not. It's all Teen Titans because these two were both on the Teen Titans. But Mal was, unfortunately, this is what I really liked about it. So it was a similar thing with the Black Lightning issue, is that Karen and Mal here tell their stories from their perspective, i.e. from an African American perspective. So you see how racist those comic books could be. Certainly not intentionally, I wouldn't say, but yeah, they used Mal as like he was, before he became Guardian, he was just kind of their flunky. And, you know, I mean, you know, back then nobody thought twice about it, but yeah, now it's pretty problematic. But then when you get a guy like Ridley, who is a very competent, I'm definitely enjoying his work more and more, especially as this series goes on. Because the one novel of his I read, I didn't like at all. But so he's telling their story from an African American, because he himself is African American. And so you see, it's like, oh. But, I mean, beyond just the liberal white guilt, it's just a really well-told story. Because when you read those old Bronze Age books, you have to really... That was something else reading this that I realized... Oh, this is another chatty one. You have to suspend a lot of disbelief in order to enjoy superhero comics. That's just a given. You know, they're fantastical stories. But you can suspend your disbelief better, more willingly and ably, if everything else around it in context, you don't have to. So if I have to suspend disbelief that Mal Duncan is going to be this kind of step and fetch it, I mean, it wasn't that bad, I don't think. But if he's going to be this sort of ancillary character and you know, just kind of he was a token, is basically what I'm getting at. So to hear the perspective of that character from a black writer as opposed to a white writer who was probably very well-intentioned, Marv Wolfman, but, you know, probably didn't know any black people. I mean, geez, I was out of high school before I really knew any black people. So it was really good. It was good. It was good on a, like I said, on a white liberal guild basis, but also just good storytelling. And what's even more, I would like to point out, the visual storytelling is rather something as well, because I'm not over the moon with this format. So it's like this. It's a lot of pin-up pages, splash pages with a lot of text around it. I mean, a lot of these pages look gorgeous on the wall frame, but it's not super duper fun to read until what I realized was that this is drawn by Giuseppe Camuncoli and Andrea Cucci, who drew the previous issue, but this was much different. The previous issue was, even though Giuseppe Camuncoli was only doing layouts, his style is very, what's the word I want? His style is very, you're so useless. It sticks out. Like, it's hard to miss if you're familiar with it. And this, though, he and Andrea Cucci are very, very, very much trying to draw like George Perez. And that is good storytelling. George Perez and Marv Wolfman were the creative. Marv Wolfman was the writer. George Perez drew the Teen Titans throughout what many consider their best. Many people consider it to be those two like amongst their best work, and definitely best of the Teen Titans. Jimmy, do you like the Teen Titans? Not even kind of. I couldn't tell you a single issue of the Teen Titans that I've ever read. And it's not just because when I worked at the comic shop alphabetizing, because they changed names. It was Teen Titans, and it was Titans, and it was Team Titans for a while. It was such a pain in the balls. But honestly, I'm not that into DC. But I'm into it enough to realize that Wolfman and Perez's work on that book in the 70s was, exemplary. It was just really good. And so not only for Ridley to tell the story from his perspective, but for Camuncoli and Cucci to still tell it from George Perez's perspective, that sort of attention to detail is all too often missing in a lot of storytelling. And, comic books are no better than, well, actually, comic books are way better than any other medium, but unfortunately, that sort of thing happens. But also, fortunately, this sort of thing happens. And I don't know. For a smart guy, I'm pretty anti-intellectual a lot of the time. And when I was, younger, like in my late teens, early 20s, and I started, just kind of I was half-assedly in college, but I was just starting to go, all the shit they were teaching me in English classes growing up was starting to make itself apparent. I think that's what I wanted. And so I go, you should, and I tried to explain to my friends how Joseph Campbell influenced the Star Wars films, and they would shut me up. They're like, dude, we don't want to, it's not fun for us. And I was like, oh, because you guys are dumb. And that's fine. It's not always, what's fun for you ain't fun for me. I can almost guarantee you that. And what's fun for me is noticing shit like that. I feel like I enjoy this. I don't want to say better than other people would, but I feel like I'm enjoying it on more levels than your average jerk. What am I trying to say here? You are so, I don't know. I think that's just all. I really like comic books. That's what I'm getting at. I also like slouching. I need to set this further back. I need to shut up. It's 20 minutes already. All right. We'll see you back here next week. 2, 3, 4. Boo, 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 boo.